I was born into a family that viewed love not as a basic human right, but as a heavily taxed currency. And from the moment I could walk, it was made abundantly clear that my account was permanently overdrawn. I'm 34 years old now, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the designated scapegoat of my family. My parents, Richard and Alina, were masters of the art of appearances. To the outside world, they were the picture of suburban aristocratic grace. They lived in a sprawling, breathtaking six-bedroom estate in the most affluent zip code in the county. They hosted charity galas, drove imported luxury cars, and wore clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But behind the heavy oak doors of that estate, the reality was a suffocating nightmare of psychological warfare. And the general of their army was my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe is 30, and she is the textbook definition of a golden child. If Chloe drew a stick figure, it was framed in the living room. If I won the state science fair, I was told my tie was crooked and that I was taking attention away from my sister's upcoming dance recital. Everything I did was a disappointment, a failure, or a source of embarrassment. I remember being 16, working two grueling minimum wage jobs just to buy my own decent clothes for school, while my parents handed Chloe a brand new convertible for her 16th birthday simply for existing. When I brought up the unfairness of it, my father looked down his nose at me with a sneer I will never forget. "Chloe has a certain standard to maintain, Mark," he said, adjusting his Rolex. "You, on the other hand, need to learn the value of hard work. Not all of us are destined for greatness. Someone has to scrub the floors." That was the defining moment of my life. I realized then that I was never going to win their game because the rules were specifically written for me to lose. So, at 18, I packed a single duffel bag, walked out the front door, and never looked back. I didn't take a dime from them. I took out student loans, worked full-time through college, and eventually started my own software logistics company. It was brutal. There were nights I slept in my car, and weeks I lived on cheap ramen and tap water. But by the time I was 30, my company was thriving. I had built a self-made seven-figure net worth. I bought my own modest but beautiful home in the city, married an incredible woman who loved me for who I was, and built a chosen family. During those years, my contact with my biological family was minimal. I was required to show up at major holidays just so my parents could maintain the facade of a happy, complete family for their country club friends. During these dinners, they would continuously belittle my career. "Oh, Mark does something with computers," my mother would sigh dramatically to her friends, waving her hand dismissively. "It pays the bills, I suppose, not like our Chloe who is pursuing her passion." Chloe's passion was essentially existing on our parents' dime. At 30, she had never held a job for more than 3 months. She lived in a luxury condo paid for by my parents, took biannual trips to Europe, and treated everyone around her like the hired help. The true climax of this twisted dynamic began about a year ago, when both of my parents fell suddenly and aggressively ill. My father suffered a massive stroke, and my mother, whose health had been declining due to years of heavy, secretive drinking, was diagnosed with advanced liver failure shortly after. Suddenly, the parents who had treated me like a stray dog for 3 decades needed me. Chloe, naturally, couldn't handle the stress of a hospital environment. She claimed it was entirely too damaging to her mental health and spent the majority of their final months on a healing retreat in Bali. So, who was left to manage the doctors, the insurance claims, the late-night hospital visits, and the grueling end-of-life care? The scapegoat, me. I did it because I am a decent human being, not because I loved them. I sat by their bedsides, holding their hands as they faded. In his final lucid moments, my father looked at me, his eyes clouded, and whispered, "Mark, you have to promise me, take care of your sister, the estate. She needs the estate. Promise me you won't fight her for it." Even on his deathbed, his only concern was Chloe. It stung a deep primal ache in my chest, but I just nodded. "I have my own money, Dad," I told him quietly. "I don't need yours." He smiled a weak, almost cruel smirk. "Good," he wheezed. "Because you aren't getting it." They passed away within 2 weeks of each other. I planned the joint funeral, paid for the caskets, and arranged the reception. Chloe showed up to the service in a designer black dress, weeping theatrically for the cameras and her friends, clinging to the arm of her latest flavor-of-the-month boyfriend. She barely spoke to me, except to ask when the will reading was going to happen. The reading of the will took place a week later at my parents' high-end, estate lawyer's office in the city. The mahogany-paneled room smelled of expensive leather and old paper. Chloe sat across from me, her legs crossed, sipping sparkling water with an air of absolute triumph. She didn't even try to hide her smirk. Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. He read through the standard legal jargon before getting to the heart of the matter. To our beloved daughter, Chloe, Mr. Sterling read, his voice monotone, we leave the entirety of the primary family estate, including the house in Oakwood Hills, all vehicles, the contents of the primary checking and savings accounts, and the family investment portfolio. You have always been the light of our lives, Chloe. We know you will maintain the family legacy. Chloe gasped, bringing a perfectly manicured hand to her chest. Oh, Mommy and Daddy. They were so generous, she whispered, looking at me with eyes that screamed, I won, you are nothing. Mr. Sterling looked down at the paper, then back up at me. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. And, to our son, Mark, he paused, taking a breath. We leave the contents of the old safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 402, and the vintage iron key that opens it. This box belonged to your grandfather, whom you always foolishly admired. Since you always preferred the past to the future, you may have whatever junk is left inside it. Do not ever say we gave you nothing. The room fell dead silent. Chloe let out a sharp, genuine laugh. A box of Grandpa's old junk, she giggled. Wow, Mark, you really hit the jackpot. Maybe there's a moth-eaten sweater in there you can wear to your little computer job. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. My grandfather was the only person in that family who had ever shown me an ounce of warmth. He was an eccentric man, a child of the Great Depression, who despised my parents' flashy lifestyle. He died when I was 12, and my parents had always mocked him for living in a tiny cabin despite having had money at one point in his life. Mr. Sterling slid a small, heavy envelope across the table toward me. Inside was an old, tarnished, heavy iron key and a piece of paper with an address. Is that it? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. That is the entirety of the will, yes, Mr. Sterling said quietly. I stood up, took the envelope, and looked at Chloe. Enjoy the house, Chloe. I hope it brings you everything you deserve. Oh, I will, she practically purred. I'm already planning the renovations. I'm tearing down your old bedroom to make a walk-in closet. Don't worry, I'll send you pictures. I walked out of that office feeling a complex cocktail of emotions. I wasn't surprised, but the sheer deliberate cruelty of it, the final twisting knife from the grave, hurt more than I cared to admit. My wife held me that night as I finally broke down, mourning not the parents I lost, but the parents I never had. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I took the morning off work and drove down to the First National Bank branch listed on the paper. It was an incredibly old branch downtown, with marble floors and brass teller cages that looked like they hadn't changed since the 1920s. I presented the key and the death certificates to the bank manager. He looked at the key, then at his records, his eyebrows disappearing into his hairline. Box 402, he murmured. Mr. Davies. This box hasn't been accessed in over 40 years. We've just been auto-deducting the tiny annual fee from an escrow account your grandfather set up in the 80s. Your parents never once came down here to open it. They thought it was just old junk, I explained. They didn't care about anything that didn't shine. The manager led me into the vault, a massive room lined with thousands of metal doors. He inserted his master key, I inserted the heavy iron key, and together we turned them. The lock clicked with a heavy, satisfying clunk. He pulled out a long, surprisingly heavy metal box, set it on a private viewing table in a small room, and left me alone. I stared at the box for a long time. My heart was pounding. I unlatched the lid and opened it. The box wasn't filled with old sweaters or sentimental junk. It was filled, top to bottom, with perfectly preserved stacks of paper and heavy canvas bags. My hands trembled as I pulled out the first stack of paper. They were ornate, beautifully printed certificates. I read the elegant script across the top. United States Treasury bearer bonds. I had read about these in business school. Bearer bonds are essentially cash. Whoever physically holds the paper owns the value of the bond. They are untraceable, completely anonymous, and the U.S. government stopped issuing them in 1982 to prevent money laundering. I checked the denomination on the first bond. It was for $10,000. There were hundreds of them in the box. Hyperventilating, I opened one of the heavy canvas bags. Inside were solid, gleaming gold Krugerrand coins. Dozens of them, there were 4 bags in total. At the very bottom of the box was a handwritten letter on yellowing paper. It was my grandfather's handwriting. To whoever finally opens this, if it's Richard, I hope you choke on it, though I know you're too lazy to ever come looking for a rusty old box. If it's my grandson, Mark, I saw the way they treated you, boy. I saw the fire in your eyes. Your parents are fools who build castles on quicksand. Real wealth isn't flashed in the street, it's buried in the foundation. I liquidated everything I had before I died so they couldn't get their greedy hands on it. Use this to build your own castle. Love, Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face. He knew, he had seen me. And my parents, in their absolute, blinding arrogance and narcissism, had literally handed me the key to a fortune because they thought a rusty key was beneath them. It took me 3 weeks, working with specialized wealth managers and high-end attorneys to safely liquidate and appraise the contents of the box. The bearer bonds had been accruing interest for decades. Combined with the sheer weight of the gold bullion, the total value of grandfather's junk came out to $4.2 million. Tax-free, untraceable, and legally, indisputably mine. I invested every single penny of it into low-risk, high-yield index funds and real estate. I told no one but my wife. We didn't upgrade our lifestyle, we didn't buy a Ferrari. We just slept infinitely better at night, knowing our future and our children's futures were entirely secure. Meanwhile, I waited because I knew my parents. I knew their castle on quicksand. It took exactly 6 months for Chloe's life to spectacularly implode. It started with a frantic voicemail left on my phone at 2:00 a.m. Then a dozen text messages. Then she actually showed up at my office building demanding to see me. I had security bring her up to my conference room. She looked awful. The designer clothes were wrinkled, the roots of her hair were showing, and the arrogant smirk had been replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. "Mark," she gasped, her hands shaking as she slammed a thick stack of manila folders onto the table. "You have to help me. You're a business guy, you have to fix this." "Fix what, Chloe?" I asked, leaning back in my chair sipping my coffee. "I thought you were busy tearing down my old bedroom." She burst into ugly, gasping tears. "The estate," she sobbed. "It's gone, it's all gone, Mark." And then the glorious, beautiful truth came spilling out. My parents, the masters of the illusion of wealth, had been living a lie for the last 15 years. To maintain their country club lifestyle, their imported cars, and Chloe's luxury condo, they had mortgaged the massive family estate not once but 3 times. The house was leveraged to the absolute hilt, but that wasn't all. The family investment portfolio, Mr. Sterling mentioned, it had been entirely liquidated years ago to pay off my father's secret gambling debts and my mother's exorbitant shopping habits. The primary checking accounts had barely enough in them to cover a few months of the massive property taxes. When Chloe inherited the estate, she didn't just inherit the house. She inherited the crushing, suffocating debt attached to it. Because she was unemployed and had zero credit history, the banks immediately called in the loans upon my parents' deaths. "They're foreclosing, Mark," she screamed, her voice cracking. "The bank is taking the house. They already repossessed my car this morning. And the IRS sent a letter. Mom and Dad haven't paid property taxes in 3 years. There's a lien on the house for hundreds of thousands of dollars." I looked at the paperwork she brought. It was worse than she described. My parents had effectively left her a ticking time bomb of financial ruin. Because she had foolishly signed the executor papers and assumed the estate without doing due diligence, she was now personally on the hook for a mountain of secondary debts. She was completely, hopelessly bankrupt. "Wow," I said softly, looking up at her. "They really were generous, weren't they?" "Stop it," she shrieked. "Stop being smug. You have money, Mark. Your company is doing great. You have to bail me out. You have to pay off the mortgage so I can keep the house. It's our family home." I stared at her. I thought about the ruined birthdays. I thought about the sneers. I thought about the hospital visits where I wiped the spit off my father's chin while she was getting a massage in Bali. "No," I said simply. Chloe froze. "What?" "No," I repeated, my voice steady and cold. "I'm not giving you a dime. Dad said it himself, Chloe. I have to learn the value of hard work. Not all of us are destined for greatness. Someone has to scrub the floors." "You can't do this," she screamed, slamming her fists on the table. "We are family. Mom and Dad would want you to help me." "Mom and Dad explicitly left you the entire estate," I reminded her, standing up. "They made their choice. They wanted you to have their legacy. Well, congratulations, Chloe, you have it. Enjoy the legacy." "What about you?" she spat, venom dripping from her words. "You got a box of worthless junk. You should be helping me." I stopped at the door. I thought about telling her. I thought about pulling up my bank account and showing her the $4.2 million sitting comfortably, growing every day. I thought about telling her that the worthless key she laughed at had secured my family's wealth for generations, while the mansion she gloated over was putting her in the poorhouse. But true revenge doesn't need an audience. It just needs execution. Yeah, I smiled, a genuine, warm smile. I just got a rusty old key. Good luck with the IRS, Chloe. I walked out of the room, instructing security to escort her out of the building. Today, Chloe is officially bankrupt. The bank seized the estate, sold it at auction for a fraction of its perceived value, and Chloe was evicted. Without our parents to fund her lifestyle, and with her credit completely destroyed, she was forced to move into a tiny, rundown studio apartment on the bad side of town. Last I heard through the grapevine, she finally got her first job, working as a cashier at a discount grocery store. As for me, I'm sitting on the back porch of my beautiful paid-off home, watching my kids play in the yard. I wear my grandfather's vintage iron key on a simple leather chain around my neck. It's a daily reminder that all that glitters is not gold, and sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones the arrogant overlook.